Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Ite Namani.
The first time I saw him, I'd actually met him by hearing about him, you know. I'd already developed a relationship with him just by hearing about him. Vishnu Kshetra Swami came to Austin. I was a hippie, a singer-songwriter, out to save the world with my guitar, kind of a hippie mentality, you know. And I realized that I needed to become spiritually enlightened, and I was trying to figure out how to do that, but I understood that Jesus Christ was a self-realized soul, so I want to know what made Jesus spiritually perfect, and I found that he says, Father, not my will, but thy will be done. So I was praying to God, please guide me how I can be your perfect servant. That was my daily meditation, begging, begging, begging. And then Vishnu Kshetra Swami was sent by Krishna to answer my prayer. And then my whole thing was with Vishnu Kshetra Swami in the beginning. And of course, he was very Prabhupada conscious person, totally immersed in Prabhupada. So from him I imbibed that faith in Prabhupada.
Prabhupada was flying in from Los Angeles to do some college preaching for the weekend. And Donavir was the temple president at that time in Portland. And I thought Prabhupada lived in Los Angeles. I had no idea he traveled around the world. Anyhow, we came to the airport, and we were in the airport watching the plane land, and Prabhupada walked across the tarmac because it wasn't the kind of modern thing now. It was where he came down the ladder and walked across. Well, Prabhupada amazingly gave me mercy from the instant I saw him. It was unbelievable. As soon as the doors opened of the plane, and when Prabhupada came to the door, I'm looking, it's quite far away. All I see is that Prabhupada is totally effulgent, and he's not walking on the ground. And he's just the most amazing person. And then I could hear Prabhupada speaking to me from, this is amazing, talking to my soul, saying, I love you, I will never leave you. And then I could hear my soul talking to Prabhupada, say, I love you, I'll never leave you. And it was like this from the minute I met, personally, Prabhupada. Of course, I'd met him in so many ways before, but not manifest like that. And then he did something else quite amazing. All I could hear for about 2 hours, and it never came back again, was the whole world was chanting Hare Krishna. Every blade of grass, every person, everywhere was just chanting Hare Krishna. And I was just like, I was completely stunned, of course. And I stayed there for the weekend. I can't remember much. I'm so sorry. I do not have the best of memories. But of course, I spoke with Prabhupada and whatever, but I don't remember much. I only remember getting chastised because I didn't sit properly in the proper cross-legged position, that I wasn't sitting properly. That's what I remember. And but then I went back to Seattle, and I talked my parents into buying me a plane ticket to Los Angeles. And I flew to Los Angeles, I found the temple, and I joined, and I never left. That is how potent Prabhupada is. He just picked me up from the gutter, from hell, and he placed me in Goloka Vrindavan, and it was so beautiful that I never left. And I'm now here living in Vrindavan.
Then one day was the initiation, and it was arranged to happen in Jardin de Luxembourg, the Garden of Luxembourg, a particular park in Paris, where the devotees set up everything with big, good-sized yagya, fire yagya, and so on. And perhaps there were 15 of us taking initiation, 12 or 15. And since I hadn't seen an initiation before, I wasn't aware that the arrangement was actually going on in a different way from usual. Nor did I notice that clouds were gathering, because I was just fascinated by everything going on. And so, whereas usually Srila Prabhupada would chant on beads and then call the devotees forward one after another, and they would speak the vows, and then Prabhupada would give the beads with the name. None of that happened here. Simply there was yajna, mantras, swaha, and then it was finished, and then it started raining. And as I said, I wasn't really paying attention that there were clouds. So then it started raining. I looked up, oh, it's raining. And I looked over, what's Prabhupada doing now? And Prabhupada was gone. He was already gone. And so I thought, oh, this doesn't seem quite right. Weren't we supposed to get beads and name and something? But okay. So it was a 2-day event. This was the first day, and then the second day was, next morning, was in the temple. Srila Prabhupada gave his Bhagavatam class on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 1, verse 15, which says that purification by bathing in the Ganga several times, so many times, does not compare to receiving the mercy of a devotee once. And so that was a nice preparation, introduction for the remaining part of the initiation.
But the next morning, after Mangalarti, Prabhupada went for his morning walk. And this was the last morning walk that Srila Prabhupada took at the manor. And it followed the famous route out of the manor, through the village, up across the field to and then back down the lane. So we all got to be with Prabhupada chanting, but it was a big group. And typically when Prabhupada was in a larger group, he didn't converse as freely as when it was just a small, intimate group of disciples. But when we got back to the manor, Prabhupada saw the Rath Yatra cart, and it was sitting uncovered, and that disturbed Prabhupada. So he pointed out, no, there must be a cover made for the Rath Yatra cart. He wanted to make sure it kept in clean, good condition for the festivals.
In 1973, I was in the ISKCON Calcutta temple, and Srila Prabhupada was there, and he was going through the temple from his room, which was just nearby, and followed by some devotees, and then he stopped, and then he looked at the Mridanga sitting on the floor. And Srila Prabhupada said that Mridanga should be kept on a nice stand. It should not be kept on the floor. The Mridanga is a sacred instrument. And so then he continued walking. And thereafter, Gagamuni, then Swami, was always very careful about keeping the Mridangas on a specially made Mridanga stand. And that was honored for quite a long time. I'm not sure if it's still going on now. Sometimes it is honored and sometimes it's not honored, but what we learned from that incident is that Mridangas are a very sacred instrument, and they should not be kept on the floor but they should be kept respectfully on a stand or on a mat.
So in 75, Prabhupada was going to come, so I was so excited to see him. But then I missed him because he came on Thursday and he left on Friday. We was thinking we'll go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because I was in my 4 days. So we missed it, and the Vishwakarma called me and he chastised me that why you didn't come. So I told him the reason, and he says, no, you can come to the temple and see Prabhupada, it's no big deal. So then I remember that next time I won't miss him. So when he came in 76, I made a garland, and then we went to the airport and temple, and then when he came out of the car, Prabhupada, I saw him first time properly, because at the airport I couldn't see him much. So I feel like he's my everything, just looking at him. He's so humble, and I said, he's my father, he's my guru, he's my everything. I will give my life to him. That's what I decided, just looking at him. And then my husband offered him garland. He went in, sit down on the Vyasasana, and he started taking out the garlands one by one. So I told Prabhupada, you just wore my garland 2 minutes ago, Prabhupada. Please don't take out my garland. So he took out garland and he put mine back.
You told Prabhupada?
No, I think in my mind that Prabhupada, please don't take out my garland. I always talk to him in my mind with Prabhupada because I'm a woman, so I couldn't speak because there was a brahmachari temple. So I told him, please don't take out, and he put my garland back, and it really touched my heart that, oh, he's even listening when you talk to him, even in the mind.
Yeah, San Francisco is pretty amazing. We had, Krishna Kshetra Swami headed out first. We made a flag of Hanuman for his Jeep. I did that on his request, and we were supposed to go then after that, the 3 or 4 or more of us, but then the GBC said we needed to stay back and keep the center open. But then Krishna Kshetra Swami said, those boys can't do anything anyway, let them come to see Prabhupada. So then Satsarupa said, okay, we can go. So Mahananda came down from Dallas and picked us up. We drove out to San Francisco on that magic day when Prabhupada is arriving at the airport. Prabhupada's coming. So there's about 300 of us. There was no security. You just go right into the jet bridge. So there was like 150 devotees on each side, jumping in ecstasy, and all the non-devotees are coming off like, wow. So we come into the middle of a kirtan off the airplane, you know. And finally, Prabhupada arrived. It must have been the last one. I was expecting some huge God Guru, 20, but we all hit the pavement. And the amazing thing was the devotees thought it is very auspicious if we give Prabhupada a trail of yogurt to walk in. So they put a trail of yogurt through the whole airport terminal. Prabhupada walked in a trail of yogurt all through the airport terminal. And then he finally got out to where, the cars pick you up, but there was no one to pick him up. And there's some photographs of this, actually. Prabhupada is standing there like a stately gentleman. And there's about 300 devotees all standing around taking his darshan. He just not a word, just standing patiently waiting for his ride. Went to the festival site, and it was so wonderful. Oh, that lecture. He got up in Subhadra Devi's cart. There was 300 devotees and about 3,000 hippies. Prabhupada gave a wonderful lecture. He said, you have all seen God. Because Krishna says, I'm the light of the sun. He says, and every day you're drinking water, once, twice, thrice, more than that. If every time you drink water, you remember that Krishna is the taste of the water, immediately become Krishna conscious. So Prabhupada made it so sublime and so easy. The light of the sun, the taste of the water. And in this way, the festival began.
The next year, Srila Prabhupada came to London the next summer, 1973. And the devotees had organized Ratha Yatra, and it was with 3 chariots, 3 rathas, And it was a grand event going down the streets of London to Trafalgar Square. And Srila Prabhupada was taking part, and I also didn't know this until later, but usually Srila Prabhupada would take his seat on Subhadra's cart, and then he would just ride with the procession. He didn't do that this time. He was too much in, as we say, too much in ecstasy. And so instead of sitting, he was in the procession, walking and dancing. And with arms in the air like this. There are some photos. Arms in the air and with tears. We could see the tears coming from his eyes. So we could understand this is the real thing. Prabhupada is experiencing the ecstasy of Lord Jagannath, Subhadra, Baladev in procession in London, in the place which was the capital of the British Empire, and in which now Lord Jagannath was having a victory procession. That was the sense of how things went.
June 8th, 1972 is when I met Prabhupada. And so somewhere along the line I'd read the Krishna book, and somehow or other I really wanted to be named Vrindavan. But as you know, they usually name you after your first letter of your first name. My name was Susan. So I thought, there's no way I'm going to get the name Vrindavan. But at that particular, it was Balaram Purnima in Los Angeles. Prabhupada was in such a Vrindavan mood. He gave the name Gopinath, Madan Mohan, Vrindavaneshwari, Vrinda, probably more, but I don't remember. And I was the last person. And so then I thought, oh, you know, so then he called me up, and of course he asked, what are the 4 regulative principles? And you say, and for some reason I really wanted to make Prabhupada happy. So I looked at him and I said, and always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. And he really liked that, because that's of course the essence. And he laughed. And he said, your name is Srimati Vrindavan Vilasini, Devi, dasi. It's a name for Radharani, the one who enjoys in Vrindavan. And I was just, whoa, yeah, this is really beautiful. You know, so then I stayed in Los Angeles. And as you know, I didn't follow Prabhupada around. Because Prabhupada really taught us to stay in our Prabhu Datta Desh, where we were, and do service for him, making him the center of our lives. And we did everything for Prabhupada. We did.
And then Prabhupada was only with us that one, he then gave class that morning. It was on Purusha and Prakriti. And this was the first opportunity I had to hear Srila Prabhupada speaking directly. Obviously we'd heard his tapes, and but this was the first time Prabhupada was actually speaking the philosophy. And it was very clear Prabhupada wanted us to be really tuned in. He wasn't just giving us some simple messages about having faith, but he really wanted us to understand the science and the deep theology of our Krishna consciousness movement, and to understand it so well that we not only built our own faith, but that we could help to convince others. I really felt that, you know, Prabhupada was trying to train us to be more expert and knowledgeable.
So now we're back in Texas, and my 6 months is up. But Prabhupada is in London. So Vishnu Swami writes a letter recommending myself, Ron, and Chris for initiation. We got it on August 12th, 1971 from London. Prabhupada writes a letter. And in this letter, giving its initiation, he very wonderfully said, you have been trained up in the expert guidance of His Holiness Vishnu Jana Maharaj. So that really that was reconfirmed for me how important Vishnu Swami was in my relationship with Prabhupada, because he was training me how to be Prabhupada's disciple. So that was a very wonderful thing, that Prabhupada confirmed the expert guidance of Vishnu Swami. So now we had the initiation ceremony in the front yard of the temple, and Prabhupada's not there to turn your Guru Dakshina into. So what do? I mailed 3 checks to London. And I told Prabhupada, I want to spread this movement, Prabhupada. I wrote him my enthusiasm for spreading the movement. I got the most wonderful letter back from Prabhupada. He noted the exact amount of each check, like a pucka accountant. And then he said, gave me the most wonderful blessing. He said, I can see you're a very sincere, enthusiastic boy. He said, continue enthusiastically as you were doing, and surely Krishna will bless you. Now that instruction has kept me going for a half a century. Prabhupada told me to always be enthusiastic, and it works. Prabhupada wasn't just saying that. Prabhupada knows the science of Krishna consciousness perfectly. And the fact is that Krishna has reciprocated by my enthusiasm to serve Prabhupada for a half a century now. So this letter of September 7, 1971, where Prabhupada said, I can see you're a very sincere and enthusiastic boy. There's an extra wonderful thing about that letter. After Prabhupada, he dictates the letter, they type it out, and then he signs it. But when he signed it, he decided to put a PS in his own handwriting, in ink. He said, P.S., we are going to Nairobi on Friday night. And that meant a lot to me, because in a business letter, in other words, I'm Prabhupada's son. You see, that's a family thing. The father would say, oh, son, we're going to Nairobi. And it's like an insider thing. You're an insider, you're a family member. We're going to Nairobi on Friday night. I'm going to Nairobi. That really touched my heart. That Prabhupada accepted me not just as a disciple, but as an insider, as his son, an intimate son. I'm going to Nairobi on Friday night. You see, that was very special for me. And then an interesting side point, I don't know if it's for the video, but Ishan Prabhu, when Vishnu Swami had been ordered to open 10 centers, so Austin was number 2, they went to San Antonio to number 3. He called Ishan Prabhu to come from London to take charge of the Austin Center. Now Ishan had been there in London where we were cultivating the Beatles. So Ishan had this idea that you can cultivate the leading people. So for my initiation ceremony, which Vishnu Swami did in the front yard of our temple in Austin, he invited the mayor of Austin, and the mayor came. And the neighbors called the police. They're disturbing the peace, and the mayor said it's okay and sent the police on their way. But my dad, can you imagine, my dad comes up to attend my initiation. He's sitting there chatting with the mayor of Austin, attending my initiation ceremony. It really impressed my dad. Wow.
The next year in the summer, Srila Prabhupada came to Germany. And he came to the main temple, at that time Schloss Rettershof, which is about half an hour drive outside of Frankfurt. And my special memory from that time was the one occasion on which I asked Srila Prabhupada a question, and Srila Prabhupada gave a very extensive answer. It was at the conclusion of a lecture, an evening Bhagavad Gita lecture. Prabhupada was lecturing on Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 14, Matra Sparshastu Konteya. And he was, as he always did, he was speaking so strongly on the point of the necessity to tolerate. And I remember him saying that the moment of death is when the soul simply can no longer tolerate being in the body. That is what is death. And he was speaking about material desire and spiritual desire. So at the end of his class, he invited questions, and one devotee asked a question which didn't really relate directly to the lecture, and Prabhupada kind of shook his head. He didn't really respond to it. And then I sort of got up my courage to ask a question, and it was really sort of I think looking back, it was the classical "how can we" question. How can we give up material desire? And Prabhupada's answer was, as I remember, he said, no material desire, just desire for Krishna. And then he elaborated, he quoted the verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Anyavilashita Shunyam Jnana Karmadyanamritam Anukulyena Krishnanu Shilana Bhakti Uttama. Uttama Bhakti means devotion completely free from karma, jnana, etc. And then he elaborated by giving some examples of how we can engage this body in the Lord's service. And at one point he said, you can clean the temple for Krishna, you can cook for Krishna, he gave 3, 4, 5 things you could do for Krishna. And the last thing he said of this little list was, you can drive a car for Krishna. And everyone laughed. And the reason everyone laughed, because everyone knew, presumably everyone except Prabhupada and his servants and secretary, everyone in the local, they knew that my service was driving the temple vehicle for all kinds of purposes, shopping and taking away the garbage and driving devotees on Sankirtan, because I had a driver's license. And we all laughed because we all knew there would have been no reason for anyone to tell Srila Prabhupada in advance, there's this one brahmachari and he's the temple driver. There were so many devotees doing so many services. But it seemed, when Prabhupada said, you can drive a car for Krishna, it seemed to all of us that Prabhupada knew that I was the driver. So that was a kind of, wonderful experience.
So in Mayapur in 1973, on one occasion, Srila Prabhupada was returning from a morning walk, and Guru Kripa and Jasodanandan, then Swamis, were sitting on a mat, very enthusiastically reciting their slokas, as they would do. They were very learned in many slokas. So they had their books on the same sitting mat that they were sitting on. And so as Prabhupada and his entourage were walking nearby, and they kept chanting. And so Srila Prabhupada changed the direction of his walk and came over to them. And it was expected that Srila Prabhupada, or anticipated possibly, that Srila Prabhupada might appreciate their chanting of the slokas. And that may have well been the anticipation of Jasodanandan Swami and Guru Kripa Maharaj. But instead, Srila Prabhupada was quite emphatic, not angry, but very emphatic, that he didn't say anything else. He said, don't keep those books on the same mat that you're sitting on. Put them onto a book stand. And then he just walked around and then continued his morning walk. So that was very instructive, that we should always be very, very respectful for the his books, any sacred books, and don't put them on any sitting place, what to speak of the floor.
One time when we were cleaning his quarters there in Los Angeles, it had been raining for a long time, and he didn't go out when it rained. But then it was sunny, so he went out. So the person in charge thought, well, he'll stay out a long time. But of course he didn't. You know, he came back quite quickly. So he came back before we were finished. And he comes up the stairs. His quarters were on the second floor. So he walked up the stairs, and we're kind of, okay. And the person in charge said, oh, Prabhupada, we thought you'd stay out a long time. You know, it was so sunny. And Prabhupada, as only Prabhupada can, you know, he's magnificent, put his head kind of up and goes, where there's Krishna, there's light. Where there's no Krishna, there's darkness. And he walks into his room and closed the door. You know, okay. You know, he was always teaching, but in such a kind way, you know.
My main memories, though, will be connected with his visit then in 1977. We were already aware for several months of Prabhupada's health condition, and we were getting the regular reports through. So it was a complete surprise to us to hear that Prabhupada was now coming to the West, and he was going to come and visit Bhaktivedanta Manor. We were just completely ecstatic because we didn't believe that was going to be possible. And again, we all went down to Heathrow to meet Srila Prabhupada, and I don't think we were prepared for how we would see him. Prabhupada was in a wheelchair and looking so frail, and he'd lost so much weight that it seemed that there was no muscle tone, no flesh on his body, and the skin was just lying across his bones. But he still looked absolutely radiant, effulgent, and serene. And he'd had a terrible flight over from India. There was a stopover in Rome, and it was a big delay, and Prabhupada just simply had to sit on this the plane. And at one point, Tamal Krishna Maharaj felt he should encourage Prabhupada, and he said to him, Prabhupada, you know, the devotees would be so pleased to see you when we get there. And Prabhupada just replied, yes, it is good that we have come. So that was Prabhupada's kindness, his mercy on the devotees, that whatever the incredible, not just inconvenience, but suffering that he had to go through in order to kind of be with us, he was willing to cope with that. And it was Tamal Krishna, he told us the story, you know, on that day when we were having the darshan. He mentioned how there was other guests, other travelers on the plane, and they were watching Prabhupada and realizing that, you know, this personality just seems like no other. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj showed him the Bhagavatam and said, you know, here is the author of that book. And he said that these people were so impressed that Westerners just folding their palms and offering respects to Prabhupada on the plane.
The last time I met Srila Prabhupada was in 1977 in London. Srila Prabhupada made this very unexpected visit to London in September. We had all been hearing that Prabhupada was very sick, that he was in Vrindavan. And the last thing any of us imagined would be that Prabhupada would be traveling anywhere. I was traveling in East Germany at that time. There was West Germany, and there was East Germany, and there was this so-called Iron Curtain in between. And I was with Ganesham, Mahaprabhu, who later was initiated as His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami, assisting him as the BBT Library Party representative as a translator for German. And after some days there, we drove back to Schloss Reddershof, and we thought, okay, now we're finished traveling for some time, we can take a break. But as soon as we walked into the building, the temple, someone said to us, "Did you hear that Srila Prabhupada is now in London?" No, we didn't hear that Srila Prabhupada is now in London. Are you sure? Yes, we're sure he's in London. So we kind of, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj and I looked at each other, we grabbed some prasadam, and we jumped back in our car and we drove nonstop to London. And because Bhakti Tirtha Swami had already been recognized by Srila Prabhupada for his distributing of so many of the, especially sets of Prabhupada's books in universities, libraries, and so on. When Prabhupada heard that Bhakti Tirtha Swami was now there, he immediately called for him to come and report. And I was invited to tag along with him. So I did. And by this time, Srila Prabhupada's physical appearance was quite shocking for us to see, because he was extremely emaciated, extremely thin, and so it was quite painful to see how Prabhupada was. But he was sitting up, he was alert, and when we came into his room, we sat down and Bhakti Tirtha Swami proceeded to read the written report that he had just finished writing about the last week that we had been in East Germany. Every week he would write a report and send a copy to Satsvarup Maharaj and one to Srila Prabhupada. But now he was in front of Prabhupada, so he was reading that report. And one of the things that he mentioned in this report was something we observed. This was, again, behind the Iron Curtain. This was 1977. The Cold War was going on. And we would see that the supermarkets were practically empty. And we would sometimes see people lined up, waiting to get food in the shops. So Bhakti Tirtha Swami was describing that reading, and I looked at Prabhupada, and again, tears were coming from his eyes. When I saw that, I could understand, and he stopped him reading, and he said, yes, he spoke, he said, this is what happens when they become atheist country, atheist leaders, then there is no provision. People are deprived. And what struck me, though, was, and this is the quality of Prabhupada that struck me so much, his compassion. It was not simply, spiritual compassion, thinking their spirit soul. Yes, he's thinking like that, but he's also feeling for them, for their material condition. And that really struck me. that he was, and not just he was saying something, but he was feeling it, and you could see he was feeling it because there were tears.
So as a young devotee, I one time asked Vishnu Swami a question. He said, I don't know, why don't you write Prabhupada? So I did, and that's how I started writing Prabhupada letters. I was encouraged to write letters by Vishnu Swami. And I would get letters back. But then there was a new policy now. That now, from now on, only GBCs, sannyasis, and temple presidents should write Prabhupada. No one else should write, but I was desperate. I just had this urgent need to write Prabhupada. So I didn't put my name on the return address, so hopefully it might get through the security and get to him, you know. And then I got a most wonderful letter back from Prabhupada. He reminded me of the new policy. But then he said, but if there's any urgent matter, I'm always happy to hear from my beloved disciples. So Prabhupada gave me an exemption. Personally told me I had an exemption to the policy. That was a movement-wide policy for every devotee in the whole movement. But Prabhupada told me that I could write him when I had an urgent need. And again, that showed the great compassion of Prabhupada and how much he cared about each and every single disciple. That was a wonderful, wonderful thing that Prabhupada, and I did take advantage of that until I no longer felt the urgent need, and then I was happy. I knew Prabhupada was with me, and I felt the connection. I didn't need to write him after the urgent need was gone. But for a while, I still wrote him with urgent questions that I had to have answers for.
In 1973, I was in the ISKCON Calcutta temple. It was an evening kirtan. Srila Prabhupada was on the Vyasasan. In those days, the Vyasasan was actually on the deity's right-hand side if you're looking at the deities. It was near that front door there, where the front door is still there. And there was a very enthusiastic and lively kirtan being performed. Srila Prabhupada's, right next to Srila Prabhupada's Vyasasan was a tulsi plant. And one Bengali man in civilian dress was playing the mridanga very enthusiastically, and he was making himself very prominent so that he could exhibit his very skillful mridanga playing. But in the midst of his enthusiasm, he started brushing against Tulsi Devi. The kirtan was led by His Grace Dinanath Prabhu, who was a very expert kirtan leader. But when this gentleman started brushing against Tulsi Devi, Srila Prabhupada rose his voice very, very loudly and says, "Do not be disrespectful to Tulsi Devi. Tulsi Devi is not an ordinary plant." And the tone of Srila Prabhupada's voice and the strong expression on his face drew a complete silence from all the devotees participating. It just went from a roaring kirtan to complete silence, and everyone was looking around. So Prabhupada then motioned for the kirtan to continue. And so the kirtan gradually built up again. So what I learned from that was always be very, very respectful to Tulsi Devi, wherever Tulsi Devi is. Hare Krishna.
I did also go to Ratha Yatra in San Francisco with Prabhupada. I don't remember which year. We came from Los Angeles, and that was the most amazing experience. That's the year he was throwing the red roses. There's a video of that, beautiful video. And it was so amazing because there was hundreds of Western people there. No Indians really, maybe one or two, but it was all Westerners. They were coming to see the Rath Yatra, Lord Jagannath, you know. And the kirtan was so inspiring. I remember we danced for hours and hours and hours in Golden Gate Park. And Prabhupada was there dancing also. If you, in the video, he was looking at us, right? And then he would turn and look at Lord Jagannath, then he'd turn back so gracefully. But you could see, he himself was astonished at the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. He was astonished to see all these hundreds of Westerners coming to see Lord Jagannath, walking in the parade. Unbelievable. He had brought Lord Jagannath out of Puri, where we weren't allowed to go in to see Lord Jagannath. He had brought him to San Francisco, and then, as you know, all over the world. And it was the Westerners who made the cart, probably made the deities, who did everything for Prabhupada. Everything was all, and they were, all we wanted was to see how happy Prabhupada was, and he was happy. He was so happy, you know. He was just giving this Braj Prem. He's a Brajbasi, his home is here. So he was just, his whole being was Vrindavan. Everywhere he went was Vrindavan. When he walked into the temple room in Los Angeles, you felt you were in Vrindavan. It was so heartwarming. You just never wanted to be away from Prabhupada. You just wanted to be with him.
There was a huge, in one sense, festive mood to be with Prabhupada, but also a very poignant, I wouldn't say sad, but very reflective mood to be with Prabhupada in those situations. The night before Prabhupada arrived, I came back from Life membership, went to the office where we worked, and found that my desk chair had been taken by the devotees. And they turned it into a palanquin. And I felt really, really pleased that my chair was now becoming Prabhupada's palanquin. You know, and we had to do that because to bring Prabhupada downstairs. And certain devotees, strong, muscular devotees, were engaged in carrying Prabhupada from his room down the stairs for darshan at 7 o'clock. And then we had moved the Vyasasan back in its place at the back of the temple to allow space for the palanquin beside it. Prabhupada had asked us not to sing the Guru Vandana prayers. And the reason that we were given is that the emotion that Prabhupada would go through hearing the prayers sung from his disciples was too much for his body. It has to be appreciated, Prabhupada could not move any muscles. He really just, he was just there, and it was just any kind of movement was a strain for him. But he showed his pleasure. And there was one time we were doing kirtan, and the kirtan was going really nicely, very ecstatic for Prabhupada, and Prabhupada just moved his hands like this. Just that sort of gentle movement like that. And the devotees realized what Prabhupada was saying to them. Dance! And everyone just leapt, practically hit the ceiling. It just became wild. And then this beautiful, huge smile spread across Prabhupada's mouth to show, yes, this is how to please me. This is the most pleasing thing, seeing the devotees dance and chant ecstatically.
So now a most wonderful thing is happening. It's 1972. It's Janmashtami Vyas Puja in New Vrindavan, and that was the place. Now Mayapur, Vrindavan, those days New Vrindavan was the place for festivals. So Prabhupada is coming. It's going to be a wonderful thing. So the Janmashtami was there, you know, all day long, fasting till midnight. Actually, we're there with Prabhupada. We're sitting there with Prabhupada. Finally, midnight comes. Now we can take prasadam. And then Prabhupada says, now we will read Krishna book. At midnight, instead of prasadam, Krishna book reading. So 1 chapter, 2 chapters, 3 chapters, and then Prabhupada said, I think you're getting impatient. And he stopped the reading. And we took Vishadam, but with such a sense of humor, you know. Prabhupada was just relishing Krishna pastimes, and we were thinking, when can we eat, when can we eat? So that was a wonderful thing that Prabhupada was, he took us to the austerity of continuing our fast after midnight to hear Krishna Lila. It was a good training for us, but at the same time he understood our need and we had to take Vishadam. And he let us take Vishadam, finally. And that was a very delightful thing when he said, I think you're getting impatient. Prabhupada's sense of humor, you see. He had a wonderful transcendental sense of humor that really showed that night. I think you're getting impatient. We'll talk about the understatement of the century.
So when Prabhupada was leaving the house, the son was crying. The Prabhupada, don't go. So Prabhupada says, why don't you come with me? The Subhavila's son. He was at the door when Prabhupada was leaving and he was crying. He said, Prabhupada, please don't go, stay here. He was like 10, 11 years old. So Prabhupada says, I can't stay, but you can come with me. He said, no, I have to ask my parents. So then Prabhupada left. So I was praying him very hard. Every mantra I was saying, Prabhupada, please give me Diksha. So then we wrote later and Tamal Krishna Maharaj said no. Then I was still praying. I said, maybe I should not give up.
No, you cannot take it.
Because he said, because you have already Gaudiya Vaishnava, so you don't need to, because Prabhupada was sick. So I was thinking I should not give up my hope. I will just keep on praying. Maybe one day something will happen. So one day Vishwakarma called me and he says, I have a surprise for you. And I said, please tell me what it is. And he says, you're getting a Diksha. So I was like so happy, you know. He said, Prabhupada send a mala and name. We was 18 of us, 16 or 18. So we all was getting, that was the last batch Prabhupada gave initiation. And then I prayed, as soon as I find out I am getting Diksha, so I prayed to Radha Gopinath that give me name that I can remember you. So my name is Amrithakeli, so Prabhupada gave me that name. So Prabhupada is always very merciful. So I was very happy.
There's one funny one, but this is a little embarrassing, so I don't know. I could tell you, but it's really kind of funny. You know Brahmananda, he's passed now. Well, he was a sannyasi, and he had come with Prabhupada to Los Angeles. And he got all excited, and he decided he wanted the ladies to learn certain things that the ladies in India do. And I don't know why he decided to call me in and try and teach me, and I was supposed to teach all the other ladies, right? So he tried to teach me how to oodle, you know, ooh, whatever. Of course, I couldn't quite get that one down. And then he said all the ladies, they wear their sari over their head, you know, like this. So they do this, you know. And I forget what else he tried to teach me, but those are the two I remember. So me being very, you could say submissive or dumb, I took him kind of seriously because he's a sannyasi, you know. And so at the next Srimad Bhagavatam class, I'm sitting there in front of Prabhupada with my sari like this. And I used to always sit at Prabhupada's feet. And there's hundreds of people in the room. And Prabhupada, I'd been told this because, of course, I couldn't see anything. Prabhupada looks over at me and looks at it and goes, is she sick? Is there something wrong with her? Tell her to put her sari up. And so in front of everybody, I have to put my sari up. I could have killed Brahmananda, you know. It's like, he was very playful, and Prabhupada, too. It's like
So then we would carry Prabhupada from the altar, from the Vyasasan, up the stairs. And at the top of the stairs, the devotees would turn the palanquin around so that Prabhupada was facing back down to the devotees at the bottom of the stairs. And Prabhupada would very gradually just offer pranams to the devotees to recognize the love and the affection that was being shown. And Prabhupada would be in return to his rooms. We didn't have any darshans during this time. But Prabhupada did meet with the German Sankirtan devotees after the first day. And the reason is because they were the top of the world at that time. They were the biggest distributors of his books at that time. So Prabhupada wanted to give them a little blessing. But Prabhupada would sometimes call Jayatirtha and Vichitravirya, who were the GBC and the regional secretary at the manor, to his room. And Vichitravirya told me a couple of the incidents when they were called, you know, emergency, please come. You know, so they'd be rushing up, Prabhupada, one Prabhupada. And Prabhupada would say, are the devotees getting nice prasadam? And then another time he would call them and said, and are the cows doing well? So Prabhupada was showing just the simple things that we had to look after if we wanted to have a successful movement. You know, we might say, oh, we're doing this, these big projects, we're doing all sorts of things, we're achieving this, that, and the other. But are the devotees getting nice prasadam? Are the cows being looked after? And that's still, there are still questions for us.
At that time, I was a member with Vishnujan Swami of the rock opera, the traveling rock opera. And we actually been rehearsing at New Vrindavan because after Janmashtami, we're doing a concert in Pittsburgh at a big auditorium called the Syria Mosque. So we're up there doing, the rock opera is going on, and there was one very prestigious person who came to attend our rock opera, and that was Srila Prabhupada. They made it in the center aisle, they made a Vyasasana for him, so he's sitting right in the center. Now in those days, devotees didn't applaud. That was something only karmis do. Devotees don't applaud. But there was one person in the audience who applauded, and that was His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. He applauded after every song. So I was one of the actors in the drama. They had me up there with a long, a beard, a long-haired wig, pretending like I was getting high on marijuana. And so Prabhupada, one godbrother, he was sitting there listening to Prabhupada as he was, and I heard a report from him. Prabhupada said, the hippies are doing their business. Then Prabhupada said, are those all our men up there? So Prabhupada's sense of humor, And the fact that he applauded after each song, that was quite amazing. Because devotees didn't applaud, only Prabhupada applauded. Of course, now everyone applauds, but that was what Prabhupada applauded for every song. He appreciated what we were doing.
But my main connection with Prabhupada was always internal. That's why I don't remember the external, because I know that's going to take me back home, back to Godhead, and it's there for everyone. Even those who had, when Prabhupada was unmanifest, all of you, you can have your deep internal relationship with Prabhupada. That's the real thing. It's the soul to soul. Right. And so to me, that's what really matters, and that's what I nurtured. I read Prabhupada's books. I have read everyone so many times. I was in Los Angeles, that was a BBT. As soon as a book would come out, I would read it. Like this. And also one time, when the devotees couldn't chant the verses so well, the Sanskrit verses, he said to us in Los Angeles, everyone should chant a chapter of Bhagavatam every day, meaning the Sanskrit. I don't know how many people took him seriously, but I did. So I started doing that. And then, of course, you want to read what's there. So I would chant and read. I went through the whole Bhagavatam like that. And I've read the Chaitanya Charitamrita probably 50 times. That's the book that saved me, just over and over. And I was always chanting and doing the same thing. Of course, Nectar Devotion, everything is there. So this is the thing, Prabhupada is there. We just must serve, selfless. That's the one thing, Prabhupada, he came, he has so much to do in such a short time, he made the platform, isn't it? He made a platform. And then he gave the essence, selfless, unmotivated, uninterrupted, affectionate service to Sri Guru, Gauranga, and Radha and Krishna. That's the essence. Everything else will come, like this. But he gave that, and he had us, you can see what Prabhupada's disciples did, isn't it? I know Burijan, he got sent to Hong Kong. He had just been a devotee a short time. He was all by himself to Hong Kong. There's still a temple in Hong Kong. The devotees got sent to England, Germany, all Africa. And they did it. They risked their lives. Unbelievable. Prabhupada made us so, we had so much faith. So much faith. I don't know, maybe not everyone has it now, but at least then, we could do anything for Prabhupada, anything. Because he would always say, I can't do it, or something like that is a word in a fool's dictionary, you know?
Impossible.
The impossible, yeah, that's it. The impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. And he also, he was so, he empowered us so much, he made us actually feel that just tomorrow we're going to go back home, back to Godhead. No doubt. You know, it was unbelievable, really.
Prabhupada was there for us for Janmashtami, but couldn't partake in that. I remember the life membership office where I was working was right next to his darshan room, and then further along was his bedroom. But so often we would hear Prabhupada in the next room just coughing and having difficulty in his breathing. And it's a terrible thing to hear someone that you love going through that just perpetually. And it's not that there was going to be any respite for that. There's no treatment, there's nothing that seemed that was going to make that better. That's a very painful thing for any person, you know, to hear. So this made us very reflective of our responsibilities to Prabhupada, both in terms of being good disciples and keeping his mission prospering and flourishing. Then the day after Janmashtami was Vyas Puja, and Prabhupada came down to the temple room, and Tamal Krishna gave the class and gave a little story of Prabhupada's life and achievements. And Prabhupada was just sitting there kind of enjoying it, hearing these different things. And at one point, Tamal Krishna says, and Prabhupada, you know, would go anywhere and preach anywhere, you know, whatever the situation, Prabhupada was willing to preach. And Prabhupada says, even in a garage. There was some program that he'd done, even in a garage. So Prabhupada enjoyed the Vyas Puja. Again, we didn't sing the Guru Vandana prayers and Prabhupada's. We had Guru Puja, but we just, you know, sang the Maha Mantra.
The next thing that happened, on 18 December 1972, Prabhupada wrote me a letter, and he gave me the most wonderful instruction in that letter. He said, now you just become qualified to see Krishna face to face. Of course, we know that mantra, you know, Premanjana Chadita Bhakti Valochanena, Santak Sadaiva Hridayeshu Valokyanti Yang Shama Shunduram Chintyagunas Svarupam Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primary Lord, who is Shama Sundar, Krishna himself, with inconceivable, innumerable attributes, and the pure devotees see in their heart of hearts for the eye of devotion, tins with the salve of love. So Prabhupada said, now you must be like that too. And that instruction has been sitting with me for like a half a century now. I have to do that. I have to qualify myself that I can see Krishna face to face. Prabhupada ordered me, I have to do that. So somehow begging his mercy, you see. Prabhupada gave very, very strong instructions like that sometimes to encourage us to come to the level of prema bhakti of the great acharyas. He wants all of us to come to that level, but he personally gave me that order. I take it very seriously. Every day I'm just begging Krishna, begging Prabhupada I can come to that level. Every day I'm begging, begging, begging. So Prabhupada has empowered me to be in this prayerful mood of begging for that, be able to come to that level of Krishna consciousness, of being able to see Krishna directly face to face.
So even nowadays, whenever I have some problem, I pray to him. I either open his book or hear the video, CD or something. Then whatever question I have, he will talk for first sentence. One time my husband was president in Vancouver and somebody was saying something and I didn't like. So I prayed to Prabhupada that, I don't know, I'm not happy. So I put the tape on and Prabhupada says, caravan walks, elephant walks, and dogs barks behind it, but caravan keep on going. So maybe he told me that don't worry about anything, just preach. Because he told my husband to preach. So we are holding that instruction so tight and trying to go wherever Prabhupada takes us. And only by his mercy we can preach. We live from suitcase, we don't stay in Vrindavan, we go everywhere. So I thought if I please Prabhupada, then Krishna will be automatically pleased. Thank you very much.
He said, just give me one little lifetime. I will do the rest. So if we can give one lifetime to Prabhupada, certainly since he's actually a Brajbasi, so powerful. Who can control Krishna? The Brajbasis, by their praying, isn't it? Braj praying controls Krishna. And the topmost, of course, Srimati Radharani. And he's Rupanuga, so he's in the Rupa Goswami group, Rupa Manjari group. Topmost, they control Krishna the most. So, Prabhupada is so powerful. If we surrender, if we just only want his lotus feet, only want to serve Radha and Krishna, he can do everything. But we have to want that. Not a chocolate bar, not warm weather, not an AC, not, to be number one, nothing. Prabhupada taught us that. You can't have one speck of material desire, not one pinch. Then he will do, right? So.
The one time that Prabhupada actually, if you like, our gaze met, and I think all devotees know that when Prabhupada looked at you, he wasn't seeing anything on the outside, he was seeing right through to your soul, knowing exactly who you are, all the craziness, all the nonsense, all the Maya, but still just seeing you are Krishna's servant. I can help you. Just please give yourself to Krishna. And all of that gets spoken in Srila Prabhupada's glance.
Another interesting thing in a letter, we have now devotees who say that only Prabhupada can be spiritual master, no one else can really be guru. But in a letter of 31 December 1972, Prabhupada told me that I could aspire to become Jagat Guru, the spiritual master of the whole universe. He said, no, all material desire is zero, and then he said, whether you can be like that. So Prabhupada actually told me I could aspire to become Jagat Guru. What to speak of Guru? Prabhupada said, Jagat Guru. If they hear this, I don't know what they're going to think. But Prabhupada told me I could aspire to become the spiritual master of the whole universe, Jagat Guru. Personally wrote me.
Was that in response to a letter you had written him? I mean, why did you mention that?
Yeah, no, I had, well, previously like I mentioned in the beginning, I was a hippie singer-songwriter out to save the world, I had that kind of a Messiah, save the world idea, so I just threw it in one letter. Can I aspire to be a famous singer, famous preacher? I just threw it in. I just threw it in somewhere other than Jagat Guru. And Papa said yes.
You asked him if you could become
If I could aspire like that, yeah.
Oh, aspire.
Yeah, could I aspire to be famous? Is this a material desire? To want to be a famous preacher, singer, and is it a spiritual desire or material desire? I was asking him. He said it was spiritual desire. You could aspire like that, he told me. But then whether you can be like that, he challenged me, you see.
1973, he wrote it from Dallas, ISKCON. My dear Vrindavan Vilasini, please accept my blessings. I beg to acknowledge receipt of your letter undated. I forgot to date it. Thank you very much for the very nice bead bag and kurta. Oh, I made him a bead bag. I am very pleased to hear that you're distributing many of my books, especially Krishna book. You are a very sincere girl. Please continue to engage wholeheartedly in Krishna's service, and there is no doubt that you may go back home, back to Godhead in this life. Hope this meets you in good health. Your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. So in one sense, that says it all, doesn't it? The beginning and this, you know, so, and I knew that in one sense in Bhagavatam class that, I mean, you know, I had led a pretty degraded life. I didn't deserve too much. I was getting the causeless mercy of Nitai. Akhanda Guru Tattva. Prabhupada was giving me causeless mercy. You know.
The next morning, however, I was in the kitchen cooking the breakfast for the devotees. That's probably why Prabhupada asked what devotees getting good prasadam, because I was cooking breakfast on a few occasions. My friend Abhiram, who was his servant at the time, came and Vichadevira came in and said, look, we need help. We need to track down a life member doctor who can come and see Prabhupada. We don't want to involve just the standard doctors. Is there someone who's a naturopath or someone who can help? And together we were making phone calls round to see if there was anyone who could come, and it wasn't really happening. But Prabhupada was his condition was getting worse. And devotees were becoming more and more concerned, and we knew that Prabhupada had told us, whatever happens, don't let them take me to a hospital. But at a certain point, when it became obvious that we weren't going to be able to help him in any other way, I think it was Abhiram who made the decision. We called the ambulance, which came very, very quickly for Prabhupada. Prabhupada was then taken to Watford General Hospital, and it was very serious. It was a life-threatening situation for him. And, you know, we'd had many kirtans over many months for Prabhupada to pray for his health but the kirtan that we held then was different. This was real. Prabhupada had been with us, and now he is heading to hospital, and we don't know what will happen. So the mood of the devotees was just tearful and desperate, and that was reflected in you could feel that in the kirtan. I can't remember which devotee asked me. He said, look, here's Prabhupada's bead bag, and he's been taken to the hospital without his beads. Could you drive that over? So we went over to the hospital, and I met the other devotees in the waiting room. It was not the main wait, it was near the operation, near the wards. And I remember seeing Prabhupada then being wheeled in the gurney, you know, just past us. And, you know, that's probably one of the most painful visions I have, seeing Prabhupada in that situation. But we heard very soon after that actually the operation that he'd had was successful, and that it had relieved the kind of situation at that moment. So actually the devotees there at the hospital, we were all really just thankful and relieved and happy, and just felt we need to get the news back to the devotees at the manor.
And when he came to Toronto, he had a toothache. I didn't even know. And when he was seeing us, we didn't notice that he's sick. After Harisori was saying somewhere that when he came to Toronto, 76, he has a very bad toothache. So Prabhupada was not, you know, even so much pain, he was still preaching. So that's what I learned, that we should not worry about the body, just preach.
Now we're in Atlanta, Georgia. It's 1975, and Prabhupada has come. And it's so wonderful. Now, so many devotees, they got to do morning walks, it's so much personal association. I didn't get so much personal association. So I took advantage when in Atlanta that I would plant myself just beside the Prabhupada's, right on the right hand of the Vyasa. I'd be right here by the Vyasa sun, just right there, just inches away from Prabhupada. I got as close as I could physically. And so Shrutakirti, his personal servant, was on the other side. So I remember one day, I was standing there by Prabhupada, and I was looking across Prabhupada's lap at Shrutakirti Prabhu. And he gave me the most wonderful, beautiful, merciful smile. And I realized that actually he was like a mirror, and Prabhupada's mercy was bouncing off of him onto me through Shrutakirti Prabhu. So that's a very telling thing, that Prabhupada's mercy is not only available through Prabhupada, but to those who are sincerely representing Prabhupada, you can also get Prabhupada's mercy through them. That was a nice realization.
And I felt so close to Prabhupada when I was distributing books. So close. I was so happy. Sometimes, as I told you earlier, we were distributing books 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. Yes, for days, sometimes years. Yes. I was in the Los Angeles airport and the Denver airport, and I think I did a little bit of traveling Sankarshan, but not much. I was mostly in Los Angeles. We started door to door, then we did parking lots, and then we did the airport. And it was all legal. Well, the first year of the airport wasn't legal, actually. And I went to jail twice, actually, when we were trying to legalize the airport. And then we got it legalized. And then of course, I finally left in 1989. I came to Vrindavan ISKCON, and I've been living in Vrindavan ever since. Of course, I've been to the West, but my home has been Vrindavan since 1989.
Well, of course, many of us were there when Prabhupada gave that song class, Parama Karuna Pohundvijana Nitai Gora Chandra. Of course, I taped it with my cassette. Now, Prabhupada actually, after many devotees recorded it, and then Prabhupada said he wanted someone to play it back so he could play his madanga, but I didn't play my back, I kept recording. So I have the part where Prabhupada, on my recording, I have Prabhupada singing it, and also Prabhupada playing madanga to him, his tape of him singing it. But one point is, I was standing there just on his right side, and Prabhupada looked down at those deities. In Atlanta we had big, huge Gauranitai deities. And Prabhupada said, Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda have appeared in Atlanta. So I was seeing deities down there, and he was actually seeing Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. I realized the difference between me and Prabhupada, because he was actually seeing him standing there, and I was seeing deities.
I remember when the doctor came, when a life member doctor came that evening to see Prabhupada, and not in the morning. No, it was just too urgent. It was just, but this doctor probably couldn't have looked after him then. He needed the hospital. We did the right thing. If we'd brought a doctor in the morning, that probably would have just delayed things unnecessarily. But the doctor then came to see how he was settled in the evening, and how everything had gone, just to check him over. And when Prabhupada, after the treatment, Prabhupada asked, please give him his fee. And the doctor, no question, I don't want anything, But Prabhupada insisted. And the understanding we took from that was that Prabhupada did not want to create any obligation, any material obligation to anyone. He was taking service from his disciples, but that's different. That's kind of bhakti connection. but from someone who wasn't his follower, his disciple, to offer service to him without Prabhupada reciprocating would have created, if you like, a karmic debt. Now, you wouldn't think Prabhupada would have to worry about that sort of aspect, you know. Prabhupada was beyond any type of karmic responsibility or, you know, fruitive action in this world. But Prabhupada, it was just part of his perfect culture that he recognized that I cannot just accept something without giving back. So he wanted, no, please, you give him his, you know, his fee.
Another nice thing that happened was I got second initiation there in Atlanta, and Prabhupada gave it to each. You have your own private darshan, just you and Prabhupada. Wow, that was amazing. Now, normally a sannyasi is never alone with a woman, but even for that thing, even the Maharaji's got to be alone with Prabhupada for second initiation. So now I'm in with Prabhupada, and wow. And I was a little confused because you do each, you know, it's 10 times going through these different mantras. And I was wondering, well, do you do the first mantra, second mantra, third mantra, and you loop the loop 10 times, you do the first one 10 times? I was confused which way to do it. So Prabhupada just demonstrated Om Bhavaspati. He actually demonstrated it for me. He took the time and trouble to make sure he knew exactly what I was supposed to do. It wasn't like any rush thing. Like Prabhupada would give me all the time in the world, whatever I needed, Prabhupada was willing to give me. That shows me how much Prabhupada cared to see that every devotee knew exactly how to properly practice Krishna consciousness. That was a wonderful experience to be with Prabhupada in that moment. Wow. Have him put the thread over you. Oh, what a wonderful thing. Prabhupada's compassion.
Prabhupada's first business is to chant your round. So I'm always eager to chant. And I'm thinking, I hope I can chant more and more and more. Because I think after a certain time you get the taste for it. And I always think that whenever I have time I should chant. Prabhupada says, if you don't want to waste time, chant Hare Krishna. So I'm always happy to chant.
Before Janmashtami, Prabhupada travelled down to Bury Place. He went to Bury Place. I wasn't there, but when my devotee friend Govardhan, Giri Govardhan, drove him. We'd hired a nice Daimler for the day and drove Prabhupada in comfort down. And he went to see Radha Ishvara, paid his obeisances. But then we drove him past the new temple at Soho Street. And Prabhupada looked up and nodded. And that was the guidance to Jayatirtha that, yes, we could go and buy this temple and we could move Radha Ishvara. So getting that confirmation, I think was very, very important for the devotees, for the yatra, and you know, to really kind of solidify this new situation in Soho Street. Prabhupada didn't say anything on the way back, says, according to Giri Govardhan, except when they were driving out of London, Prabhupada went, Bloomsbury. Meaning that's the area where the British Museum is and where Bury Place is. And our understanding of what Prabhupada was expressing there was just his pride that when he came to London, he was able to establish a temple right in the kind of heart of the British establishment, right in the centre of the capital in London, in Bloomsbury, a famous, famous location. So again, that just indicated the special significance that Prabhupada gave to the preaching in London and in England and Britain overall.
We're all familiar with that beautiful prayer, he reasons ill who tells that Vaishnavas die when thou art living, still in sound and living, try to spread the holy name around. If we can apply this very nicely. Prabhupada has given us the world deliverance mission. Here in LA, he said, become guru and deliver the world. That's the order he gave to us, his disciples. He ordered us to deliver the world. So if we embrace that world deliverance mission, that I've been ordered by my spiritual master to deliver the world, to become a pure devotee and deliver the world, if we embrace that very tightly in our heart, then actually we're intimately connected with Prabhupada at every minute, 24/7. If we keep that world deliverance mission, my duty is to think, speak, and act in such a way to push forward this movement that the whole world can now become Krishna conscious. If we embrace Prabhupada's world deliverance mission, we'll be packed up tightly with him 24/7.
On the day that Prabhupada was to fly back to India, we'd hired the car again, and it was waiting outside the reception room at the manor. A group of devotees were all gathered round. Prabhupada was brought down on the palanquin, and then we had to bring him into the car. And just as that was happening, the local policeman, called Harry, used to, he was an elderly gentleman, and he pushed his way through the devotees. Devotees are doing kirtan, you can imagine how tight and pressed, and he pushed his way through, and he went up to Prabhupada and shook him by the hand. How are you, Prabhupada? This was his affection for Prabhupada. And this was, and Prabhupada just said, thank you very much, thank you. This was very significant because at that time there was a lot of concern by the villagers over what had happened to the largest property in their village. It had been turned into a Hare Krishna temple, and hundreds and sometimes thousands of people were coming to visit this place, and these strange Hare Krishnas, were wandering all over the place. And but the local policeman, who actually lived across the road, had met Prabhupada before and become so appreciative of him that he really wanted to see him before he left the manor that time. Prabhupada then drove all the way down to Heathrow, and the Daimler parked outside Terminal 3. And the devotees were gathering around the car, and it's one of those images that will be forever burned in my heart, seeing Prabhupada. He was sitting with his one leg under him and sitting up on the back seat, just looking totally transcendental. He was about to go on a long, long journey. He had been through operations. The doctor the night before said, I don't know how anyone can tolerate this pain. Any normal person would be screaming in agony, because you cannot imagine what happens when the flesh goes from your body and the underside of the skin is touching the bones. The nerves are just raw and just screaming. But Prabhupada showed no complaint. And just seeing him just looking absolutely regal in the back of the Daimler before he then went and took the flight.
It was very, very difficult. I was at the airport, actually, and then they picked us up, brought us to the temple room, and then they told us. And of course, that was devastating. It was just like, because that was 77. I've been to India twice, but usually we only came for 2 weeks. So we didn't really know the culture of Vaishnavism in India. We only had the West, and there's nothing but Prabhupada. You know, so it was kind of like, oh, well, now was it? How are we going to go on? You know, it was really, really difficult. But we went on through service. And then, of course, there was the structure of ISKCON that came after that. It has its good points and it has its difficulties, challenges. But Prabhupada is there. Prabhupada's books are the center. Prabhupada's the center. Anyone sincere is going to find their way. And I remember the day after I was told, I went right back out to the airport and started distributing books again. But it was really, I remember people would come up to me and I'd just start crying and they'd say, what happened? I said, well, my father just died. Because well, how are you going to say, you know? But we just went right back into our service. And that's actually pretty much what carried me. My service and Prabhupada's books, reading Prabhupada's books. That was, because that's the essence, you know? Book Bhagavad and person Bhagavad, you know? Sadhu Sangha, Bhagavad Shravan, you know, living in the holy Dham, deities, and what's the other one? Kirtan. Kirtan. Yeah.
We have lost a presence of our spiritual master, and you know, so I think we were having difficulty having a proper celebration, you know, in the way that some others doing. So I think there was different moods and different yatras, and I remember some of the reflections that came out in the days after that. And particularly one exchange I had with a devotee where they were saying, I think we experienced a change in our connection with Prabhupada. And this devotee expressed it nicely, I thought, and it kind of seemed to sum up how I felt and what I think others were going through. And that is that up to this point, we'd always thought, well, Prabhupada is in India, Prabhupada's in America, Prabhupada's visiting Australia, you know, Prabhupada's coming to the UK. We had thought of Prabhupada being localized and being with a particular group of devotees at one time. And what we were starting to then feel is Prabhupada is everywhere. And Prabhupada is with all the devotees all of the time. And that wasn't just something we were saying to make ourselves feel better. It actually was a change in our relationship, with our concept, if you like, of our relationship with our spiritual master. It was much more a transition from being so conscious of his Vapu presence to understanding Vani in terms of instructions, but more that we actually were having that connection and presence with Prabhupada more strongly and transcendentally, and not having to rely on the Vapu presence to feel that we had that. So there definitely was this incredible change, and I just felt that this is, you know, Krishna's blessing on the disciple, to giving that kind of realization to help through what is the most traumatic event in any disciple's life.
What attracts me most about Srila Prabhupada is his perfect knowledge of the Absolute Truth. He's not a speculator. He has perfect knowledge of God and how we can all become also perfect in our relationship and knowledge of God. His mercy is also there. His knowledge is there and his mercy. Both things are there. His kindness, but it's not just his kindness, he has absolute perfect knowledge of God and how we can also realize God.
Well, even as we hear in Bhagavatam, the most important one, that everything else, is his complete surrender to his Guru. Guru Seva. Surrender like this. You know, 100%. We could see selflessly surrendered to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That was his life. And that's what he taught. Everything will be successful if you just surrender and make the instructions and the moods, the inner moods of your guru, your life and soul. That's what brought Prabhupada to America. Yeah, everything like this. And of course, kirtan. He just had some in the holy name, isn't it? He was under the tree in Tompkins Square, just no fancy tune, nothing, just Hare Krishna, and the whole world came dancing, isn't it? So he had that faith in Sri Guru and Harinam, like this, you know. Of course, he is an eternally liberated soul, so he brought Vrindavan with him. That's the quality, you know. So he has the qualities of the Brajvasis, especially those in the group of Sri Rupa Goswami. He's Rupa Nuga. And that, he always talked about Vrindavan, always. You know, so. And all the rest was there, the humility, everything was just naturally there. You know? But Bhakti Siddhanta was everything to him.
And on the Vyasa Puja day, we were all treated to have what we could all see very clearly was going to be our last darshan of Srila Prabhupada. Basically, he was saying goodbye. It was just clear to us from his condition. And it was decided, I don't know if he decided or requested or Tamal Krishna Goswami suggested, but in any case, Tamal Krishna Goswami, as Prabhupada was sitting, Tamal Krishna Goswami stood next to him and proceeded to tell the life story of Srila Prabhupada over, I don't know, several minutes, from everything that Tamal Krishna Goswami had heard from Srila Prabhupada. This was before the written biography of Satsarup Maharaj was there. And every once in a while, he would look to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada would look and he would nod. He would say, yes, that's how it was, yes. And Prabhupada's nods were, I had the clear sense, not just nodding approval that, yes, you're speaking accurately, but it was nodding approval of his own life and a sense that his life had been indeed complete and successful, that he had fulfilled the mission of his spiritual master. He was feeling fulfilled that everything had been done that needed to be done. He had disciples who would now carry on his mission. All was well.
Anilo